now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. We begin with Nigeria's economy. As the National Bureau of Statistics, the NBS, yesterday released the much-awaited rebased gross domestic product (GDP) estimates, pegging nominal GDP at 372.82 trillion naira. That converts to about $243 billion as at 2024. This reflects a year-on-year increase of 18.3% in nominal terms. This means that Nigeria is now Africa's fourth largest economy after South Africa, with a GDP of $410.34 billion, Egypt at $347.34 billion, and Algeria at $268.89 billion. The NBS also disclosed that the economy grew by 3.13% in the first quarter of the year, that's Q1 2025. Addressing journalists at the public release of the results of the rebasing exercise in Abuja, the Statistician General of the Federation, Chief Executive NBS Prince Adeyemi Adeniran, said the outcomes reflected changes in economic reality. He, however, cautioned against politicizing the new figures. Essentially, the exercise changed the base year used for calculating economic activities to 2019, that was from 2010. Now to power issues, as the generation companies, the GenCos, yesterday said that the debts owed them hit 1.2 trillion naira in the first half of 2025 alone, with total arrears, including legacy debt of 2 trillion naira and another 2 trillion naira in accumulated financial obligation by the federal government in 2024, now reaching almost 5.2 trillion naira. The GenCos, in a statement by their spokesperson, Dr. Joy Ogaji, was reacting to news reports that the federal government may shoulder the new subsidies granted by the Enugu Electricity Regulatory Commission to its customers after it slashed tariffs from 209 naira to 160 naira per kilowatt hour. The GenCos expressed concern that this tariff issued by EERC has set a precedent for all other states, explaining that from their tariff order, only 45 naira is captured for generation cost out of 112 naira, pretending a bigger issue in the decentralization of power or electricity to the subnational governments. Stressing that there is no federal government policy on subsidies, the GenCos described it as debt accumulation, stressing that although the GenCos' monthly generation invoices average about 250 billion naira, the federal government budgeted only 900 billion naira for the whole year of 2025, which is not even cash-backed until now. Now, lastly, scores of retired police officers under the contributory pension scheme have staged a major protest at the Nigeria Police Headquarters in Abuja, demanding immediate removal from the pension arrangement, which they describe as exploitative and unjust. The aggrieved retirees also demonstrated at the National Assembly before meeting with the Inspector General of Police. And those are some of the big stories in the headlines today. So, Rufai, we're looking at everything from the economy, police welfare, which we've spent a lot of time discussing here. We even had a representative from the pension industry to unpack that, and issues pertaining to electricity, power. The GenCos are responding to the developments in Enugu.
I mean, I feel a lot of pain in my heart this morning seeing those police officers that serve this country diligently have to go through all of that squabble when it's time to get their pension. The bone of contention here is between defined benefit and contributory pension scheme. They feel that the contributory pension scheme for them, some of the police officers feel it's lethargic, but there's also an assurance that they will get their money, but the question is, what's the amount? But they feel the defined benefit scheme, you'll get a certain amount constantly, but that's also very scary because it's incumbent on the federal government. If federal government doesn't have money to release, then there's a problem. I think recently there was some money the federal government ought to release to those that run the contributory pension scheme to be able to pay the police officers. They didn't release it. I think it was called the accrued rights money. They didn't release it on time, and that caused a lull in the payment. But finally, payments have started again. So there's a contention of two big school of thoughts. The police should run their pension scheme themselves like other paramilitary does the military and the likes. But I think the major conversation about the pension scheme is how much the police officers earn. If you don't earn a great salary, you can never get a great pension under the contributory pension scheme, because an accrual of what you earn plus a counterpart funding of your company, you have the prerogative to be able to add some money to it. So what we should look at now is the police welfare. I've done a lot of work with the police through the Crime Writers Association of Nigeria. We've helped give scholarship, to police officers that died in the line of duty. I have been there with them. I have seen the great work Crown has done. And I tell you, it's not an easy thing for the police officers out there. The question is, how can we increase their benefits? And how can we increase the welfare that comes to them? Secondly, the case of the Gencos. So this was something that a lot of people said they saw coming. Once Enugu went ahead to say, oh, we'll be able to set our rates, then the generating companies feel shortchanged. Because once you are setting your rates, the cap on this, the increased amount for the band-aid threshold was to be able to create some sort of subsidy for those on the lower band. When the states or the state electricity body like Enugu now says, we are going to set the rates, they're also negating the fact that there's an agreement on which you even buy bulk power and now distribute called MBET. Just yesterday, part of the quota that was supposed to be given to MBET this year, large amounts of that money have not been given to MBET. So there's a shortfall. The cumulative debt is inching up to 5 trillion as we speak. So who's going to pay for the shortfall? The federal government has to step up. But we keep saying, oh, they've repulled out the subsidies. They just created an allotted amount of 900 billion this year. Then how will the Gencos get their money? And these are some of the things that we didn't envisage when we started with this new 2023 electricity law. This is a proper test case of the law. And we'll see how both parties are able to navigate this. Anyway, safe to say the fact that the law has a transitional period of a couple of years from now. So the Gencos have put their case forward. Enugu has also put his case forward. And let's see how this pans out. NBET, on the other hand, the Electricity Bulk Purchasing Authority, are saying that we don't even get the money to be able to purchase in bulk, in turn give the money to the Gencos. So it's a conundrum as regards the electricity system. People like Rotus will argue that, a full, deregulation of the system, full privatization, cost-reflective tariff. But on the flip side of that argument is the fact that do we have the culture to sustain this in a country where we have challenges like metering and the likes, that we have not even had a proper audit of the electricity system, and all these legacy problems and legacy debts still on ground? So there are many encumbrances here and there, and we'll see how they're going to sort this out. As regards the rebasing of the economy took a hit after the devaluation. As of 2023, the GDP was well over $300 billion. Today, we are $246 billion. We have swept close to $100 billion out of this GDP. No matter the level of growth, we say, okay, we've had 3.13% growth. Decent, but do you know the wealth that have been taken away from the pockets of the Nigerian people? GDP per capita used to be well over $1,000 before. All of a sudden, we're about $800, $900. In terms of GDP per capita, we're suddenly going back to where we were 40 years ago. And that wealth that you've taken off the pockets of a lot of people will never be replaced. So even with the rebasing, which a lot of people will think, oh yeah, it could be a political gimmick by this government to be able to sell themselves that, oh, we did some things for the GDP. But the rebasing still shows that we're a far cry from where we were when President Buhari left the country in 2023. And that's the sad reality of our country today. So now that we're at a 246 billion GDP, and we target a 1 trillion economy, how is it going to happen? How are we going to get growth working? What sectors are we targeting? Manufacturing, solid minerals, crude oil, service sector. Some say the reform will be a game changer. In fact, I was saying, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele say this morning in the papers, that, if we had done this tax reform about 10 years ago, we should be about $1 trillion economy. Yes, but what Mr. Taiwo didn't account for was also the ineptitude of leaders. How come that the APC was given an economy that was about 400 billion and they tanked it to about 246 billion, at first to about 199 billion now, but with the rebasing we've gone to about 240 something billion. How come you were given an economy over 400 billion and you lost half of the GDP of the economy? So no matter any policy we talk about, if we don't have leaders that can make an economy grow and double it, then we'll never go anywhere. You can say anything you want to say. I also berate the PDP for not doing electricity in 16 years and everything. But it was under the PDP that this GDP did grow to over 500 billion when it was rebased in the early 2012, 2013. But how come the APC took it and tanked it to 246 billion? I think that's a food for thought this morning.
Okay, very quickly. On the issue of rebasing. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics announced yesterday that we've had 3.13 growth, that GDP, nominal GDP is at 243 billion, oil production 1.62 million barrels per day, oil sector accounting for about 3.97%, the non-oil sector accounting for over 96%, and all of that. Now, it's nothing to celebrate, because what is clear is that the major problem we have in this economy is that nobody should be celebrating 3.13% growth of GDP. Nigeria can do better. And where the real problem lies is in the arena of productivity. This is an unproductive economy. Now, Nigeria used to be called, the largest economy in Africa. Are we still the largest economy in Africa? At a time when South Africa, Egypt, and Algeria are far ahead of us in terms of nominal GDP growth. If you look at this economy, it's the private sector that is driving this economy. And the simple lesson here is that without productivity, without the various sectors of the economy doing well, you cannot have real growth in a country of over 200 million people. That is the challenge that we face. In the breakdown, the services-led sector, the private sector, seem to be contributing more. What it means is that the public sector is not productive. You have thousands of persons working in the public sector who are not even productive and who are even underpaid and who seem to have no reason to complain about how they are badly treated by the Nigerian state because of the lack of efficiency within the public sector system. In other words, what we need is not just statistical rebasing. What we need is finding a balance in terms of productivity in the country. That's that about that. As for the GENCOs, yes, yesterday we were discussing the Enugu State Regulatory Commission that had given a directive to Manpower Electricity Distribution Limited to reduce band 8 tariff from $290 naira per kilowatts to 160 naira per kilowatt. And the Enugu State was saying that this is based on the subsidy that is given by the federal government, and that in the light of that, they want to improve customer service. And on the back of that, other states, Lagos, Plateau, Niger, Ogun, are reportedly also planning reducing tariffs. And that's why the GENCOs and the DISCOs are kicking. The GENCOs and the DISCOs are saying they are being owed money running into trillions by the Nigerian government. Now, what we're dealing with here are two issues. One, the subsidy regime. When the Tinubu administration came into power, it addressed the issue of subsidy, fuel subsidy, from day one, when President Tinubu said, fuel subsidy is gone. Two, the government addressed the issue with arbitrage in the foreign exchange sector because of the subsidy, the artificial subsidy that is there. The government said, no, this will not continue. The only remaining subsidy, the third one, that government has not dealt with is electricity subsidy. Because they talk about electricity subsidy, how much transparency and accountability do we have in this regard? What we need to do is to audit the relationship, in my view, between the Gencos and Discos and NBET, the bulk trading operation. Because what you find is that every Disco or every Genco will just come out and say, oh, we are being owed 1 trillion. We are being owed 5 trillion. And because of that, tariffs have to be cost reflective. Now that opaqueness in that sector has to be addressed. Otherwise, Gencos complaining and scaremongering, you cannot get to the root of it because nobody really knows what is transparent and what is opaque in that sector. As for the police pensioners, well, yesterday they had a protest in Abuja, and instructively, Omoyele Sowore, politician and activists joined them. And he made the point that we have made repeatedly, that the policemen, whether retired or serving, deserve better welfare. This was even one of the major 5 points during the NSAS protest of 2020. Nigeria has more policemen than soldiers, more than 250,000 policemen. Soldiers are about 120,000 policemen. Soldiers get a better deal than policemen in this country. And yet the police, they are overworked, they are underpaid, and when they retire, they don't get their benefits. The main argument now is that they say they want to be returned to the defined pensions benefit system, not they want to exit from the contributory pension scheme, which they say does not favor them. I'll waste a lot of time if I go into the history of the contributory pension scheme. But I guess where the police pensioners are coming from has to do with the fact that the soldiers, the military, retirees, they were the first to say they wanted to return to the defined benefit system. And it was granted. They returned to it. And the police immediately at that time, so this is not a new story, the police immediately at that time also said they wanted to be treated the same way as the military and other paramilitary agencies. But the police have not had their request attended to. Now, we understand that the Inspector General of Police, Kayode Egbetokun, has called for a meeting and that he wants to talk to the pensioners. Well, what the police hierarchy should understand, both at the level of the Inspector General of Police and his immediate subordinates, or down to the rank and file, is that one day they too are going to become pensioners. And the implication of all this is the absence, finally, of a social security system in the country, creating a situation whereby people serve the country and the country abandons them. Those who are serving now may well find themselves in that situation. But beyond the IGP, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu should also take an interest in the plight of these retired pensioners. Now, I've recommended, either here or elsewhere, that in the UK, they have what they call a triple lock system. That triple lock system is simply an indexation of pensions, arrears, pension payments to inflation, which means that as inflation goes up, pensions also rise. But we don't have that here in Nigeria. If you retire, you may never get your pension, you may never get your arrears, you may never have the kind of indexation that they have in the United Kingdom. So can we treat people who have served this country better so that when they are in retirement, they do not regret having spent the better parts of their lives serving the country?
Absolutely. That's a very salient point that you've made, Dr. Abati. I'm going to focus on the economy this morning because of time and the issues arising from the rebasing of the GDP and the new numbers that have been shared. Now, of course, we know that the last time this exercise was conducted was 2014, 2015. And at that time, the GDP made Nigeria the giant of Africa. It made Nigeria's GDP, Nigeria's economy, the biggest economy in Africa. But I think it's important to contextualize this, given where we are today, which is that in 2014, 2015, during that period, we're still operating on a system of two exchange rates. We had the official exchange rate and we had the parallel exchange rate, and the disparity was massive. So we're now looking at a $243 billion economy after there's been a relative unification of the exchange rate. So it's expected that because we're working with a realistic exchange rate, the number would be much lower than what we saw during that 2015 period, because we're looking at a more realistic number of economic, that reflects economic activities based off of a more dominant and realistic exchange rate. However, it's still a little bit disappointing and still concerning that even after adding digital activities, even illegal activities, even after including so many more new economic activities into the GDP calculation, that the number is still sitting at about 243 billion. Which has raised concern and will continue to spur on conversation. I'm glad that the Statistician General had said that we should be careful about, the comparisons from country to country. As much as we want to look at the overall GDP number and create a ranking, the fairest way to compare one country's economy to another truly is by PPP, purchasing power parity. So I think we should also be careful with regards to creating these ranks and saying which economies are the biggest in Africa. However, when looking at the numbers, there were some concerning details. Number one concerning detail is the fact that when you look at our GDP, the biggest contributor, over 90%, are non-oil activities. However, if you look at our trade, this doesn't translate. Our biggest export remains oil. So you have over 90% of non-oil activities that are not contributing significantly to our trade activities. And then you have trade activities that are not reflecting the fact that our internal economic activities are actually very diverse and robust. So that's number one problem, that trade policy needs to be re-looked at. This is a conversation we've always had. We usually get stuck on diversification of economy, that conversation. But these numbers show that the economy is actually relatively diversified. However, trade is what is not diversified, and something needs to be looked into in that aspect. Now, another concerning detail I saw was the fact that we're still lingering at over 50% of the GDP being made up of services. Now, this was the same case as well in 2015. Now, the issue with this is an issue we've raised several times, is that an economy that has not gone through the entire process of industrialization cannot be developed off of services. It's simply impossible. Industrialization has even become an issue of national security. If you look at the fact that it has become a zero-sum game, when we look at the trade dynamics, when we look at where the world is going, people are looking more at economic nationalism and protectionism. So if a country has not industrialized, it serves to be on the losing end as the chips continue to fall into place with what we're seeing developing as a zero-sum game in international trade. Well, there's so much that can be said around this, but I think for me the most important thing that this report highlighted is the fact that we need to revise our industrial policy, because we need to create a system that is more labor intensive. By doing so, it can become more inclusive and it can lead to genuine development, and we can see this GDP number really grow in the future.